Today we're going to be talking about cargo and the career opportunity that exists in cargo, and hint, it is significant. My channel is really here to help newer pilots, so I'm going to talk about the earlier part of the career after that 1,500 hour mark, just a little bit more in this video. First officer yearly salary, so year one works out to about $68,000 if you're flying the minimums. If you are in a 767, it's about the same. It's about $68,000. I will tell you, having recently been through a logbook audit myself, it is incredibly important that you keep highly detailed, accurate logs. Hey guys, it's Trent back with another video on your career in aviation, and today we're going to be talking about cargo and the career opportunity that exists in cargo, and hint, it is significant. So a couple of weeks ago I had the opportunity to talk with a 747 captain from UPS, and he said to me, Trent, hey, I've been watching your videos about your thought of going down the regional airline career path when you get your 1,500 hours, and let me just tell you, there are a lot of opportunities that you don't seem to be aware of, and I want to make you aware of this significant opportunity down the cargo path. So in today's video, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to share with you what I learned from talking to this captain, as well as some of the things that I've learned about one of the major cargo carriers. I'm going to share you a whole bunch of details about that. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to cover some questions that were submitted by viewers of previous videos. So if that sounds good to you, grab your coffee or whatever it is you like to drink, maybe a pen and a notepad or whatever it is that you need, and let's get into it. All right, so before we dive into all of the specifics of cargo, I want to talk a little bit about the typical career path that newer pilots, self-included, usually think of, and then some of the pros and cons. And my hope with talking about this is it will help to give you a little bit better perspective on maybe why you, and maybe me, might want to consider a career flying in cargo. So the typical career path, assuming that you've already got to the 1,500 hours, and we'll talk a little bit about that, how you get to the 1,500 hours later, but not very much because that's not really the scope of this video, is you're going to get hired as a first officer at a regional airline. Then maybe you either stay there and get promoted to captain at a regional airline, or maybe you get enough turbine time where you're qualified to jump over to a major as a first officer, and then eventually you would be promoted to captain and go up and fly bigger planes and make more money. And that's normally how it goes. So especially for my channel is really here to help newer pilots, so I'm going to talk about the earlier part of the career after that 1,500 hour mark just a little bit more in this video. So with respect to the regionals, I've had an ample opportunity through the comments on my videos, of which there has been thousands of comments, as well as one-on-one interactions with first officers and captains, both at regionals and majors. So I think I have a relatively decent handle on some of the pros and cons. So obviously let's talk about some of the drawbacks of the regionals. All right, so if you're starting off at a regional, the number one potential drawback, as it were, is you're going to be flying smaller aircraft, and smaller aircraft come with smaller paychecks. The other thing that you're going to have is you're going to have shorter flights that may impair your ability to really ramp up the amount of hours that you're getting into the logbook, which can have negative consequences on your career if you're a little later in your career, a little later in your life, and you're trying to build your hours as fast as you can. Depending upon where you live and where your base is, because of the nature of relative to cargo, shorter trips, you may have a lot more commuting days. Now, in my case, if I live in Boise and I'm based in Boise and I end up working for SkyWest, which is definitely something I'm considering, I won't have any commuting days because I live in my domicile. But not everybody has the opportunity to do that. So if you're doing a lot of 3 and 4 day trips, and you have to commute, that's a commuting day potentially, depending upon the distance of your commute, on the beginning and the end of each one of those trips. And those commuting days are now eating into your days off per month, which is obviously having a negative impact from a quality of life because you get to spend less time with your wife or your husband, and you get to spend less time with your kids and your friends and so forth. So that's maybe not so good. As I hinted at earlier, because the aircraft are smaller, you may experience lower pay. So I'm going to dive a little more into pay a little later on in this video, but I'll give you the hint now. Is when I talked to the 747 captain, he told me that if I was to be hired by the cargo carrier that I'm going to cover in more detail later in this video, my first plane would be a 767, and within a year, it was his opinion that I would be making somewhere around $250,000 a year. Now, I have not been able to verify that, so your mileage may vary. Take everything that I say in this video with a grain of salt and do your own research. I'm just here to try and grease the wheels and make it a little bit easier for you to get started. But again, this is just my opinion based upon the information that I've found from the discussions that I've had. And then finally, with any commercial airliner that carries people to go on vacations, vacations is a discretionary spend, so a softer economy may end up in you having a furlough, which obviously nobody wants to have, so you need to keep that in mind. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about some of the potential drawbacks of a regional, let's talk about some of the potential benefits of flying for cargo. Number one, as I mentioned as I alluded to earlier, depending upon who you end up going to work for, you may end up in something as big as a 767 as your very first job, first officer. Again, that was told to me by the 747 captain. I assume that he knows many other pilots in the industry because he's been doing it for 23 years, and I assume that his opinion is relatively well informed. Because of the nature of the way your work is organized in cargo, again, coming from the 747 captain, he told me that you're going to have typically, again, depending upon who you work for, could be 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So in that scenario, if you're doing 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, guess what? You only have 2 commuting days per month. The commuting day outbound and the commuting day on the way home. Now, you are away from home longer, which some people, that won't work for them. But other people, they're like, well, hey man, when I come home, I get 2 weeks off. The other thing that does is it allows you to live pretty much anywhere in the world that you want to, because if you think, well, I'm 1 day commuting on the front end, 1 day commuting on the back end, and I'm just going to, those days are just write-off days, then you can afford to commute a longer distance. And as you'll see later in this video, you might actually get paid for that commute. So if you're not having to do the commuting thing as much, you're not going to have to do crash pads and all of the related expenses to do with crash pads. And so there's a real stigma from the people that I've talked to around crash pads. I mean, maybe if you're a younger guy and you're single or whatever, you might think it's cool. But for most of the older married guys like me, like the last thing that we want to do is be on reserve in our base city, which is not our home city, hanging out in a crash pad, hoping to fly, because that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun at all. All right, so let's talk about the major players in cargo. So according to aircargonews.net, the largest 25 cargo carriers, which you should be seeing on your screen as I'm saying this, are FedEx Express, Qatar, UPS, Emirates, Korean Air, Turkish Airlines, and the list goes on down, down, and down. So as you can see, there are lots of large cargo companies for you to fly for, and depending upon where in the world you live, that means more and more opportunity for you. So here in the US, obviously we have FedEx and we have UPS, and then a company that I'd never heard of, which we're going to talk a lot more about in this particular video, is a company by the name of Atlas Air. So Atlas Air was started in the early 90s by a guy by the name of Michael Chowdhury with a single 747-200. By the end of 2000, the Atlas fleet had grown to a total of 36 aircraft, and over a period of several years, I read this on their About page, they were voted as the leasing provider of the year, an industry survey by Payload Asia magazine. In 2016, Atlas announced a strategic partnership with Amazon, and today Atlas Air has the broadest array of 747, 777, 767, 757, and 37 freighter and passenger aircraft in the world. All right, so let's talk about the being an Atlas first officer. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in the video is about the ability to minimize your commuting, live anywhere in the world, maybe get paid commutes. So let me explain what Atlas have. They have the Atlas Gateway Travel Program. And what that program does is make sure that all pilots have positive space seats for every domestic commute, which means no more flying standby and no more crash pads. That means that Atlas pilots can live where they want, and Atlas is going to pick up the cost of your stress-free commute. So if you do end up wanting to live in some, ultra remote place, I don't know, I guess there's probably limits to it, but to me that sounds like one heck of a perk relative to the other approach that would be typical with a passenger airline. Okay, so here's the requirements for being a first officer. You need to have an ATP. So with a airplane category multi-class rating and an English proficiency endorsement, you need to have a Class 1 medical, you need to have an FCC restricted radio telephone operator permit, you need to hold a valid passport with no restrictions on international travel. You need to be legally authorized to work in the United States. You are going to complete a DOT pre-employment drug test. You can be as young as 21 years old with a restricted ATP or 23 years old with a full ATP, and pilot positions are subject to FAA 121 mandatory retirement regulations. You need the ability to pass a 10-year security background check. You need to have excellent communication skills, proven leadership ability, and accurate and timely decision-making skills. Now, in terms of flight hours, Atlas is looking for a minimum of 1,000 hours of fixed wing, 500 hours with a 121 or 135 operator, or rotary military flight training graduates with a minimum of 250 pilot in command hours on a fixed wing. You need to meet the required minimum hours of 1,500 hours of total time, with the exception of, you can get down to 1,250 hours with a qualifying 2-year aviation university program, or down to 1,000 hours with a qualifying 4-year aviation university program, or all the way down to 750 hours for military flight training graduates. Their preferred qualifications are, and notice the word preferred, not mandatory, 2,500 hours of total time operating in a 121, Part 121, Part 135, or Part 91 or military environment, and a minimum of 500 hours of turbine time. And no sooner did I say that you have to have an ATP when I just discovered that there's a section on their website that says candidates without an ATP. Atlas Air now offers a limited number of highly qualified candidates the opportunity to complete the ATP certification course, which means Atlas really needs pilots, otherwise they would not be doing this. Pilots must meet all the required prerequisites for obtaining an ATP listed above while meeting the ATP minimum flight criteria. The criteria is as follows: 1,500 hours of total flight time, 250 hours of PIC hours fixed wing, 500 total cross-country hours, 100 cross-country PIC hours, 100 night flight time hours, 25 night PIC hours, 75 instrument training hours, and 50 multi-engine land hours. Now, when evaluating your hours, Atlas is going to consider numerous factors, including the complexity of the aircraft that you have flown, the nature and type of flight operations, and the recency, quality, quantity, and verifiability of flight time and associated logs. I will tell you, having recently been through a logbook audit myself, it is incredibly important that you keep highly detailed, accurate logs. So Atlas also describes the following benefit. In addition to health, wealth, and work-life benefits for captains and first officers, Atlas provides a world of benefits and perks no matter which fleet you fly. Comfort and flexibility on being gateway-based with a stress-free commute. Company paid hotels in base before and after trips and while on reserve, which is very different than regular airlines. You pay for your own hotels. Positive airline tickets for your commute for those living more than 130 miles from their base within the US. And business class for domestic and international travel while deadheading greater than 4.5 hours, which is a very nice perk, especially if you're going that long distance. Variety of schedules across different fleet types. Company paid hotels during training in sunny Miami, Florida. Income protection, although they do not say what that is. Basic life and accidental death and dismemberment insurance. Critical illness, long-term disability, paid sick days, and travel benefits via MyID Travel for immediate family after 6 months of employment. All right, so now let's talk about first officer hourly pay rates. So the very, very bottom, which is the top left corner of the chart that you're seeing on your page, is $88.81 per hour. That is in your first year. DOS, I'm not even sure what DOS means. Maybe somebody will be able to tell me in the comments. So I know YOS is years of service, but unfortunately I do not know what DOS is. So it's very, very comparable to what regionals are paying at this point in time. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the 747 captain that works for the big brown airline, cargo airline, told me that in year 2, Atlas gives you a significant pay bump, and that is not reflected in the pay tables here. So I was not able to verify if that was true. So take this with a grain of salt. I assume, keyword assume, that he said that because he probably, being in cargo for 23 years, knows people who are working at Atlas. And his explanation, when I asked, like, why the big pay raise, he said they put a lot of money into training you in year 1, and the last thing they want to do is lose you to another airline, so they give you a significant pay bump in year number 2. Atlas Air average first officer yearly salary, so year 1 works out to about $68,000 if you're flying the minimums. Obviously, you have an opportunity to fly more than the minimums, and that's if you're in a 737. If you are in a 767, it's about the same. It's about $68,000, which was less, by the way, than what my 747 captain told me. So a note about pay, the information that we are showing on the screen and I'm reading is not official Atlas pay rates, because to the best of my knowledge, they don't publish those anywhere on the internet. This data is coming from aerocrewnews.com. So what that tells me is that we need to take this with a grain of salt. My guess is, especially when I look at first year on a Boeing 767 at 68,000 bucks, my guess is this stuff is pretty low. It's probably much higher than this, because if it isn't, again, my guess is they're going to be having a difficult time recruiting pilots to come and work for these rates. So I have read other material that was published in 2023 that cited cargo pay rates in general are higher than passenger pay rates. This particular captain that I have been speaking with verified that by telling me his own income, and it's over $600,000 this year for flying a 747, which is absolutely crazy. Now, I haven't verified what the UPS pay tables are, if they even exist. I'm going to leave that for you guys to do, but my guess is it doesn't say 600 grand, and that's what this guy told me he's going to make. So I'm going to go with the first-hand information versus what I randomly find on the internet. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about some of the questions from viewers that came in as a result of a previous video that I did. So lifestyle of cargo versus lifestyle at the airlines. I think I've pretty much answered that, but to sum it up, I would say this. Cargo, it seems like you would have the opportunity to do more longer trips, which means less commuting days, you know, versus say like a regional, you're doing a bunch of 3 and 4 day trips. You may or may not, depending upon where you live, have a commuting day on each end of that trip. Those commute days, you're paying for the hotel yourself. Maybe you're in a crash pad yourself. Maybe you're flying standby, you know, kind of a pain in the butt. So to me, I think that cargo probably wins out on lifestyle. That would obviously be dependent on the specific job that you got, but just putting them all in a bucket, I'd rather do the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, have paid commuting days, have paid hotels, get to travel business class. To me, that all sounds better. Somebody asked me, well, what's the path to cargo? Is it any different than the path of the airlines? And, you know, there's no one path to get there, but you got to get to 1,500 hours. So I don't think that there is a significant difference in the path that you could take. You know, you can be a CFI, you can go and fly charter, you can do whatever it is you can do to get hired to build time. Just know that the more multi and the more turbine time that you get for either path, the better off you're going to be. What ratings are needed for cargoes? Any special ratings needed? None that I could find. Do cargo pilots fly mostly at night? Again, the answer is no, I don't think so. The fellow that I talked to said it was about 50-50, and it really kind of, because I talked to several cargo pilots, and it really came down to seniority and personal preference. So again, I can't really speak more specifically to that in the video. What size of aircraft? As I pointed out earlier in this video, seems to me cargo planes are going to be flying larger aircraft. Bigger iron means bigger paychecks. And how can one stand apart from the crowd? So going back to what I read earlier, they're looking for shiny, happy, professional people, good leadership, good making decisions, and also they're going to audit the heck out of your logbook, which means that the quality of your time. So you want as much of your time to be quality IFR time in the system, ideally on multi and ideally on turbine. And if you're flying around as a flight instructor only in a single engine plane, then maybe you need to go rent and spend some of that money that you're making as an instructor to fly around in a multi-aircraft, or get your MEI, which is my plan, so that you can get paid to log that multi-time as you're teaching students on how to fly a multi-engine aircraft. All right, so let's wrap this up. First off, I want to thank you all for watching this far. If you're still watching with me, if you've enjoyed this and this is your first video, definitely consider becoming a subscriber to the channel, clicking the bell, giving the video a thumbs up, and ideally leaving me a question in the comments. So there is a way for you to go from here and do a bunch more research on your own. If you go to airlinepilotcentral.com/airlines/cargo, you will see a pretty decent sized list of cargo companies, and then you can click on them all and you can look at their application process and what their pay rates are like and so forth. I think for me to cover all of them in one video would make for a very, very long and boring video, so that's on you to go and do that research. And if there is demand, and by demand I mean lots of comments saying, hey Trent, could you do a video like you did on Atlas but do it for this other carrier, then if we get a lot of that, I will consider doing that. But at this point in time, I kind of consider that I've satisfied the many requests I've had from viewers to give you guys a little bit better idea of the career path in cargo. As I learn more, I have no problem with producing more videos, but for now, I think this one has got you all pointed in the right direction. And those of you who are interested, I hope will go and make use of the resources that we've covered in the video and any links that are down in the description to go ahead and do your own research. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you in another video. And until then, fly with Trent.